is a bit of a shame is that when people do lie about how they achieve their results and then do almost sell their soul to the devil in the sense where they will lie to push these silly programs and these silly movements that sell a dream but haven't disclosed that genetically I had a really good shape anyway, and I worked resistance training for 3 years before going to these workouts, and also in some cases maybe I've had enhancements.
Alrighty, so Harold, first of all, welcome to the show, man. And I wanted to kick this one off, first of all, by just giving a little bit of context to our listeners as to kind of why I have you on this podcast in the first place. Okay. And so, for context sake, I came across your videos on YouTube. I have no idea how. They just popped up or whatever the case may be there. And the algorithm worked in your favor, I should say. And one of your videos popped up and I started looking into some of your content and I found it really refreshing in the way that you approach, I guess, kind of bringing out some information or some perspectives on fitness and debunking some of the myths or maybe misconceptions that are quite often found in especially the social media space and kind of with fitness influencers and what you're seeing on TikTok and Instagram and these types of things where people can get very, very confused and misled by hopefully well-meaning individuals. But generally when there's other aspects in play, such as income from ads or from products or whatever it may be, and when there's likes on the line and followers on the line, people tend to post stuff that's often a little bit more flashy, a little jazzy, and they want people to click on that stuff. And it doesn't often end up being evidence-based or put people in the right direction. So I found your stuff and thought it was really refreshing. And I wanted to bring you on and chat a little more around this whole topic so that maybe we can provide some insight to our listeners around what to look for online and what to, I guess, be aware of that might be could be detrimental to their own fitness journeys. So with all that ramble aside, where did things start for you, mate? Where did the whole getting into fitness and all that jazz come in for you?
Well, firstly, I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the kind words about the channel. That does mean a lot to me. It's interesting that the YouTube algorithm does sometimes push my content to people. I still find that quite weird.
Yeah.
Weird. So I appreciate that a lot. Regarding, I guess, my intro into fitness, God, when did it start? So I kind of got into like the gym environment when I was about 16 years old. And that was very much down the line of my dad at the time was very much into fitness, and everyone at school, I went to an all-boys school, and everyone's go-to was there like, you know what, school's finishing, we're going to go into sixth form. So like the Americans refer to that. I guess that's still part of high school for them, but we call it like college before university. Yeah. And I'm not sure in New Zealand if it's called anything different. Would you call it college or sixth form or?
Yeah, we know we have a very similar system to you guys in the UK, bro. So we have a couple of, we have like I guess at age, most people's age 16, 17, there's probably like 2 more years of school. So there's like a sixth form, seventh form, but they call it different terms now. But yeah, it's very similar to the UK, mate.
Okay, so I did that, and then everyone's go-to was like, you know what, let's get really big before we start like big school. And,
yeah, I get it.
And so the go-to was like, you know what, why not? It's easy. And my idea was I'll train over summer and come back and start a new school and be absolutely massive. It wasn't that easy, unfortunately. I wish it was. And I think like that kind of is how it all started. And the initial kind of idea, I think for a lot of young boys at that time is maybe I'll appeal to more women and maybe I'll be cool if I'm bigger.
Yeah.
And then the majority of my friends kind of fell off the wagon. They kind of stuck with it for 6 months to a year. And I've probably one of the only ones that just carried on with it. And that's where it all started, really. Just me trying to impress people and not feel so insecure about how skinny I was when I was going into a new school, basically.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of guys getting to the gym for that exact reason is just to have some level of it's less intrinsic and more extrinsic motivation. It's like I want to look good for other people, which as we can probably discuss is probably not the best approach long term for any kind of fitness endeavor, but it generally gets a lot of young guys in the gym. And I know for myself as well, when I started training it was more so to change my body a little bit, but I was also training because I was about to join the army here in New Zealand,
Oh, okay,
and
cool.
I was like, okay, I need to get fit, get some muscle,
Yeah,
all that
yeah.
kind of stuff. But a few years into the army, I wasn't training anymore. But then when I started really training in the gym proper for body composition and kind of doing some more bodybuilding style training, that was more so in relation to I want to look jacked. I want to look ripped, whatever. Wasn't necessarily happy with my physique with the shirt off at the beach type thing. So it was all that kind of idea. And I think that does get a lot of guys into the gym initially. How did the journey for you go from there? So you've obviously been training for a little while by
Mm.
this point. Did you spend a lot of that journey doing training that is a little more hypertrophy based, bodybuilding based, or did you go into any other areas?
It's a weird one. I kind of started just not really training for anything, just kind of just winging it. Basically, I had to go to the gym and bench press and hope for the best, and that's really as far as it got. But it kind of like eventually, once I kind of got into the routine of like, I actually enjoy this. This makes me feel good, and it was no longer just about trying to kind of master the insecurity. It was more about I'm doing this because I actually just enjoy being in this environment. I kind of started looking for other avenues, and then initially I actually got into. I don't know how old I was. It's probably about just after a year into my training career, I got into MMA. So I did
Oh, cool.
mixed martial arts for a few years. Did that until I want to say till just turning 20, and was there like this is really fun, but I feel like because I'm isolated to looking a certain way and performing a certain way, I felt like I couldn't really expand beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And resistance training was always my kind of desire and my goal, and it's just the thing I've really enjoyed. Like, obviously, I like the MMA training, but I've really just enjoyed the gym, and that kind of led me to like finally make the decision to actually start trying to gain weight. I'd eaten the same 2,000 calories for three odd years at this point, and obviously hadn't really gained much weight. And then was like, I'm gonna look into something else. So then I realized that I wasn't too weak. I was relatively strong for my weight. I figured, I'll try powerlifting. Let's give that a go. And that's when it kind of all started. I kind of did tickle with a bit of bodybuilding beforehand. I had this idea that I'd be Mr. Olympia, then realised it's probably not realistic. And then I was like, I'll probably stick to bench pressing because I'm all right with that. Went into powerlifting, did that for a few years. And then for a lot of personal reasons, I decided it's probably not best for me to continue that journey, just for a lot of like mental health reasons and also injuries. I had a lot of nasty injuries from it. And then I was like, bodybuilding it is. I kind of made the shift back to bodybuilding a few years ago, and I've kind of stuck with that ever since. And that's kind of like the kind of prize that the eyes are on currently.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think from my understanding, just from watching some of your videos, you have a master's in psychology. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. Undergrad in business and a master's in psychology.
Cool. So that's a really cool, I guess another perspective that you have on kind of the fitness industry is from a psychology perspective as well, which I really value. The idea of approaching things from a mental health standpoint and kind of looking at some of the things that are going around online and going, well, is this detrimental? Is this helpful in terms of a mental health perspective? And I think for me and for a lot of people, when it comes to social media, comparison is a huge component of social media. And I do want to, later in the convo, we can jump into some different methods or strategies people can use to reduce some of that comparison tendencies that we have on social media, and dive into that a little bit more. But I guess to kick this thing off and to talk specifically about social media, what were some of your initial views of the content online? I mean, I don't know when you got online yourself and when you started posting stuff, but what were some of your initial views of like what people were posting and whether it was valid or not?
I think it's when I kind of first kind of got into the social media space, not necessarily from like a posting perspective, but just from like a consumption perspective, I thought whatever you said online was true. I had no reason to doubt it. I had no reason to believe that you were lying. And that kind of led me down a lot of the fitness traps I try and almost call out now, because I've fallen victim to so many of them, and I spent so much money, so much time, and wasted so many years doing silly things essentially just to achieve something that just wasn't realistic. But it's only when I started kind of making those mistakes, I started identifying that wow, not everyone online is telling you the truth. And that was almost like a bit of a reality check in the sense I had this idea of these influencers that had no idea who I was, but they're people I'd seen online, like people like Jeff Side, for example, one of the first ones I followed. And I was thinking, wow, why would he lie? And then you realize that, like you said earlier at the start of the podcast, of the money involvement, things like that. And I was like, now it makes sense. And it was disheartening for me because it was almost like, I don't want to say like you idolize these people, but almost to an extent like your heroes, and you find out aren't necessarily telling the truth, and you're like, wow, if they're not telling the truth, I wonder who else isn't telling the truth. Or sometimes it's not even a question of telling the truth. Sometimes it's they actually genuinely don't know better, and that kind of, I think, puts a mask over the idea, especially in the PT industry, that if you look good, you must know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because if immediately when you go to a PT, you're going to go to the person more often than not that looks the best in your eyes, is most aesthetically pleasing, or the most relevant to your sport, perhaps. Doesn't mean they know the most. And that's when it kind of hit me. But then I started posting myself online back in, I think YouTube started back in 2016. And I was like, wow, there is so much misinformation on this platform. Like I almost struggled to find the good information because it was consumed by misinformation, and that's when that kind of like reality check really hit home. I was like, it's not just the people I looked up to who are doing this; it's a lot of just the people in general that are doing this, and I found that quite almost demotivating, but it was really disheartening, and left not like a sour taste in my mouth, but it left me feeling like almost a little bit upset and just disappointed, you know.
100%. Yeah, I was lucky enough to, when sort of Instagram started kicking off, to kind of come across some people that was somewhat evidence-based quite early on. So this was kind of early days of like YouTube fitness, when guys like Matt Ogus were huge, and Chris Jones were huge, and that was a huge like scene. But those guys, they were gaining some big followings, but they were still promoting some pretty decent content, and they were kind of leading the charge on this kind of transition from like bro clean eating to like more if it fits your macro style, flexible dieting style, which was generally a trend in the right direction. Of course, there's issues with those as well, but I was lucky enough to kind of come across those guys, and then from there start to dive a little deeper into, well, where are these guys getting the information from? And then you start to find, other people in the industry that are practitioners, experts, researchers that are evidence-based and going to provide some really good information. But I didn't ever really get too caught up. I mean, I did follow a few people here and there, but with these huge fitness names that were promoting, or that were just getting massive amounts of followers. And as you're saying, they don't always have your best intentions at heart when they're posting something, because they're basically running a business at the end of the day. And nowadays it's just blowing up. I mean, I'm very, very particular about who I follow on Instagram, and I don't actually really use the platform for anything other than posting my own educational content. But I know that there is a lot of people following a lot of big names, and I wanted to dovetail or almost revert back to what you mentioned before, around this idea that people gravitate towards the person with the best physique. And with social media, it's so easy for someone with an incredible physique to just blow up their numbers in terms of followers, not because of their information or their level of intelligence on a specific topic, but purely because of the way they look. And we have to be very mindful that the way someone looks isn't just purely because of their intelligent training or their nutritional interventions. There is a huge genetic component to a lot of this. And I find that people get so caught up following these huge names with these incredible physiques, and they try to copy what they do. And it's almost, in my opinion, it's very misguided, because, these people are, because of social media's massive pull, like back in the day, right? Say you were in like the 60s, the only people you're going to see generally are people on TV or people in your town, and this could be said for any time in like the 20th century, right? Up until social media, really. And, so generally you're going to see some pretty cool physiques, but now with the huge pool of access to different people around the world, you're just bombarded with the best genetic pools of the human race on Instagram, and they just kind of draw in these hundreds of thousands of millions of people to follow them. And they're kind of these people that they would probably get a really, really decent physique, kind of in spite of what they do, like not because of what they do. You know what I mean? Do you have any thoughts on that sort of things, mate, in terms of like this idea that these a lot of these people they've drawn in a lot of followers due to their physiques, but not so much due to their maybe their information or what they're providing to their followers?
It kind of goes back to what you mentioned there about these kind of like social media isolating the genetic elites, and you're only being exposed to those elites. I guess the argument, what you present is, you see these people online, like you mentioned, who just look unreal. The absolute massive guys, women in incredible shape, whatever it may be. How many times have you ever actually seen someone look like that in real life in your own gym? Probably very rare. Very rare. I've rarely seen a guy where I've been like, wow, like that is something else. The only time I've ever really done this is when I went to Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, where I saw all the people that I'd see online in person. Yeah. And in all honesty, a lot of times, for no disrespect, but social media is a highlight reel. You show the best bits of you, and in person, oftentimes you're like, wow, you look different in person. You're maybe not as big in person, because obviously you get some good angles. There's only one time I've ever seen a human that's I've never encountered on social media before, where I've looked at it and been like, you are not normal. That is something else. I don't know how familiar you are with bodybuilding. There's a Dexter Jackson, who was the 2008 Mr. Olympia, went up to this guy and asked him for a picture. He was cool. Honestly, the biggest human I've ever seen in my life. And I was just in disbelief. I just stared at him. I was like, wow, what are you?
This was at Venice?
Gold's Gym. This is back in 2015.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the mecca that...
Yeah, I think if anyone is going to LA, they always want to pop into the Mecca, and check it out. And I remember going there. I went there I did an American trip in 2018, like purely to go to gyms and road trip around gyms. But I went to the Mecca, and I was a little bit let down in a way. Like, it was kind of like 100%. You get there with this big expectations, and it ends up just being a couple of big warehouses just full of machines, and and it doesn't have a great vibe, in my opinion. Like, I'm all about like gym atmosphere. And I mean, it was a cool experience, of course, and you get to see some of the freaks in the business, but I think almost if they were to like replicate a like late 1960s era Gold's Gym, I'd be much more likely to go and check that out.
Well, see, I guess, have you ever seen Puppy Iron? With Arnie?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
of course. And you look at that, they go in and everyone knows each other. And you look at it, like one environment, everyone goes in, they hug each other, they're training with each other. I doubt there's a single person there that didn't know everyone else in that gym. And you're like, well, that's such a great atmosphere. And they look like that. The thing then is, they look like they're having genuine fun. Like, they just look like they genuinely just want to be there, not just to train, but just to be with their friends.
That's so good.
And then you go to them, like I said, I had the same experience with you. I got to Gold's Gym and I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I grew up watching. Pumpy Iron. Like, when I was 6 years old, I was watching Pumpy Iron. I had no interest in bodybuilding, but Arnie was my hero. I used to watch all his movies. Every weekend I'd watch an Arnie movie. I had all of them on DVD.
Wow. And
I was like, this is it. This is where it all started. I walked in, I was just horrendously underwhelmed. I was like, it was so busy. It sounds really stupid, but it was almost neglected, in the sense that it was almost a tourist attraction at this point. And they were like, oh, you want a day pass? It's a horrendous amount of money. If you want to buy, if you live in LA, the membership was $50 a month. If you can't prove you're an LA resident, it was $300. Just small things like that. And I was like, well, you're capitalizing on this, aren't you? And I was just like,
100%.
Yeah. And then I saw Arnie the first day I walked in.
Oh, you're kidding!
Right in front of me, and I was like, "This is the best day of my life." I was like, "This is my hero," and I went up to him and asked him for a picture, and he kind of ignored me. And then his bouncer, his like bodyguard, just told me to come back later. I was like, "Oh, okay."
Wow!" Yeah.
And then he left, and then I saw him about 4 times, and on the last time, I was with my dad's best man, who we just met out there, and we were watching Pumpy Iron together after my parents' divorce, because my dad used to live with him. And I said, like, Arnie's here. This is like, we've been idolizing him for 15 years since I've known you. This is the one. And we just went up to him, asked him for a picture, and his only response was, "Be quick." I was like, oh.
Oh wow.
And I felt like I know he's busy. Let's be honest, he's a busy guy. He's
Of course.
He had loads of people around him, but I dreamt of this day for 15 years or something, and I was a bit like, oh, okay, I'll try.
I kind of feel like in that situation, if you're Arnold and you're choosing to train in one of the busiest gyms in LA in a public environment, and you're as famous as Arnie is, and with such a reputation, like if you're gonna be training there, you better be ready to take a shit ton of photos. Like if you don't want that, wouldn't you just train in your own home environment? Like I don't quite understand that personally.
Well, you can afford it. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So exactly. It is always an interesting one. But it kind of like, I think going back to the what you originally said about the social media pushing like the genetic elites and stuff, I think the sad reality with it is, like I said, you see all these people in person and you realize that they don't look quite how they look online. And that almost brings into another issue within the industry, which I then was finally presented with, is that Photoshop and image manipulation is a thing. And I never considered it to be a thing beforehand. And then whenever someone said Photoshop, I thought you would put a picture of me on the moon and make me look like I land on the moon or something. That's my idea of Photoshop, not like make my arms bigger, make this bigger. And you realize it actually, maybe not all the time, but it happens. And then you start observing it. Then you start seeing these people in real life and be like, you're different shape in person. What's going on? Yeah. And it's almost sad. Sorry, after you.
No, you go for it, man. Keep going.
No, I was saying it's just almost sad because I think it leaves a bit of a sour taste in your mouth. Not for the fact that it's almost like you feel bad for the individual that they feel like they need to do that they have to manipulate their image. But to some extent, you kind of understand this when your life is essentially dictated by how you look and your online appearance is being assessed every day by thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. There's obviously going to be a lot of pressure to look your best all the time. But then you almost leave it feeling a bit salty as well, saying, wow, I feel a bit lied to.
100%. So with a lot of these influencers, like maybe, if they are photoshopping or whatever, I mean, like you said, even if they're not photoshopping, just the idea of Instagram being a highlight reel, you're going to take 50 photos and you're going to post that one that had that perfect lighting and the perfect angle,
which I'll be guilty of as well. I'll be guilty of that
100%. Yeah, and that's just the nature. I mean, you only naturally want to put your best stuff out for people to see, right? Because you value other people's opinions is what it comes back to, I guess. Like how would you help people to have a better understanding or maybe a better lens to kind of decipher who is worth following and who is maybe someone that they could potentially get off their feed?
This sounds a bit stupid, but I actually unfollowed every influencer that I ever used to follow. I don't follow a single influencer anymore on my Instagram account. The only people I follow are people I actively have spoken to or do speak to, like individual like JPG coaching. Like I speak to him occasionally, things like that. So we'll talk, and therefore I'll invest in him because I'm like, you're a nice guy. But when it comes to like who to follow, who not to follow, I always go down to how do they make you feel? When you view their content, how does their content make you feel? If I view someone's physique, and this is also what I used to do, is engage a lot of social comparison, where I'd view like Jeff's size physique and I'd be like, wow, I wish I looked like him. And as soon as I found myself saying, I wish I looked a certain way, I wish I didn't look how I look now, and I wish I looked like somebody else, I kind of, after a few years, I was like, that's actually quite a problematic approach. And that's not healthy. That's not right to do, say, to wish I weren't me. And then I started to kind of feel like, actually, you know what? Seeing these amazing physiques every day, whenever I went on Instagram, amazing physique that looked better than me, I found myself becoming increasingly more insecure. And I was like, you know what? I should probably unfollow everyone who makes me feel that way. Not because it's no fault of their own. It's absolutely no fault of their own. It's my own insecurities. I said, well, I know I can't consume this content in a healthy manner without feeling bad about myself. Again, not their fault at all. So I was like, I've been all of those. But then I consume content of people like, you know what? I learned something from you, so I'm going to consume it. So when JPG posts something, he's got an incredible physique, but then he'll post something, I'm like, you know what? That taught me something I wasn't aware of. I'll follow that. Individuals like that is just, as soon as I can start kind of taking something from it and feeling not necessarily better about myself from it, but better about the industry or better about my knowledge, I can learn something from it. It's enhancing my life to an extent. I'm like, that's worth investing in. But if for whatever reason, be that my own insecurities or something they're doing that I don't agree with, it's hindering my life, then I'll probably bin them off. And that's kind of what I typically say to people, and I say this a lot in my videos, is if whatever content you're consuming is not enhancing your life and is potentially therefore hindering your life, it's not worth consuming. Whether you feel loyalty to them or not, if it's taking something away from you and not adding to you, then it's probably not worth an investment. Like if I say invest in a business, but it's just going to take money from you, you're not going to get any money back, you'd probably say that's a shit investment. The same thing with that. If you invest in a business but you're going to get money in return, it's probably quite a good one. Same thing with the internet content. If you get something from it, fantastic. If you don't, not worth the investment.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, I'm very, very similar to you, Harold, in the sense that I, over the last few years, have been very cutthroat with the people that I do follow, and there's almost no one on there that because I guess my personality type is someone who will probably do a lot of comparison more than maybe other personality types. And so I'm very aware of that and very aware of how social media can be quite a negative place for me in terms of my mental health. Like I can be having a phenomenal day, jump on social media, see a post about somebody doing something that I wish I was doing, and then suddenly my whole outlook on my entire life is just shit. And in reality, I could just take a moment and instead go to my gratitude app and do my 5-minute gratitude journal, and suddenly my outlook on life will be completely reversed, and I'll be absolutely content with the small amount that I do have and the life that I do live. So I guess a question for you, maybe from a psychology perspective, Harold, if you've got any thoughts on this, like, what do you think, or do you think comparison is healthy, and do you think it is useful, or do you think it's just, do you think it's something that we can, I guess, innately avoid, or is it something that's just part of our biology as a human?
I think the shit answer is it depends, in the sense that I think comparison can be healthy, in the sense that if comparison can provide something like motivation to help inspire you or to kind of drive you, then I think that could be really good, because I know a lot of people who do get a lot of motivation and drive from comparison. Fine, if that's what drives you, I respect it. But then flip it around, if it's something that takes away from you, makes you feel insecure, makes you feel a certain way, that's probably something you want to try and avoid as best as possible. But I also fully do acknowledge that's so much easier said than done, because human nature is essentially to seek the approval of our peers and to seek the approval of everyone around us, and that often involves a lot of comparison. Or maybe human nature is to imply that we can look for a better something to aspire to, look for something else. And immediately, I think, in that sense, comparison is part of us, but doesn't need to consume us. And I feel like if you go back to, like I said, Arnie's era back in the 60s, they probably did compare. There was a lot of social comparison, but that comparison was people they actually saw in person. The comparison was against people who weren't the genetic 1% that only exist on the online world. The comparison was to their friends, to their peers, people on those lines. But then social media comes out, and the pool of comparison has gone from this to the world.
Yeah.
I'm no longer comparing myself to people I see at my gym. I'm now comparing myself to people I can see at any gym in the entire world. And immediately, like you said earlier, you're going to get exposed to that 1%. So when you're exposed to the best of the best, you're now comparing yourself to something that's just beyond unrealistic. And at that point, I feel like if you only see what's beyond comprehension, then your expectation gets distorted. So even small things, like you go up to an average person in the gym and you say, I bench 100 kilos. And most people are like, bloody, that's a lot of weight. Wow, that's incredible. But due to comparison, seeing the world record holders in powerlifting, someone says, I bench over 200 kilos. I'm saying, like, oh, that's cool. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, in the IPF standard, I'll say, well, actually, that's probably not a very good bench press. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
In the world, I don't think I've ever seen someone bench 200 kilos in my, like, physically in person outside of a competitive stand. But like I said, because you're compared or exposed to the best of the best, immediately your perception is distorted. I think that can then further distort comparisons, because like I said earlier, you're no longer comparing yourself to almost realistic people. You're now comparing yourself to the just genetic elites. And that, I think that can maybe enhance how unhealthy it could be. But again, if you find that motivating, then sure. And you can engage that in a healthy manner where it doesn't take something away from you, then, I'd go for it. But I do feel like human nature is to look for better options and look for better things through comparison, and also, like I said earlier, about seek approval, which ultimately comes to your own posting and maybe further comparison in that sense.
Yeah, I love it. I think there's just so much value in the idea of the constant what's the term, like you versus you mentality, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm only trying to better myself, because you're exactly right. You can relate. You can go to any fitness endeavor, sporting event, whatever, and you compare yourself to the elites. And for myself personally, that's a fast way to be demotivated because
100%, I'm the
even
same.
2 weekends ago, we've been doing a little bit of running, and I did a half marathon, and
Oh, well
I
done.
ran my best time. But at the
Oh, well
same
done. That's
time,
fantastic.
yeah, it's cool. It's cool. And we've been doing a little bit of running over the last year or two. We did a marathon earlier in the year. But at the same time, I'm running this half marathon, and I see the front runners coming back the other way, the leaders.
Yeah.
And these
Yeah.
guys are just like flying, man. And you just look at these guys and you're like, how are they running at that pace? And,
Yeah.
and so as soon as in that situation, if I compare myself to those elite guys, or in the gym, as you're saying, if I go to a gym, like for example, when I was in the States, I went to a world gym in San Diego, I believe it was,
Yeah.
and just ginormous dudes everywhere, And if you go on there and you start comparing yourself to them, it's going to be a fast way to demotivate yourself. And I think it just comes back to realistic expectations. Not everybody has won the genetic lottery. That does not mean you can't work on what you've got and progress with what you have. But it just means you have to be a little bit more realistic. And a number of people have come to me in the gym and be like, "Oh, I'm like, I want to look like this guy or whatever," and I'm just like, "Okay, that's really cool to have those aspirations," but I feel like I just feel like it's a misguided approach to look at a social media page and go, I want to look like this person. You are not that person. You're shaped completely differently. Your genetics are completely different. How about we look at what you have right now and we try to progress that instead,
Yeah.
And I get that probably isn't as motivating for a lot of people that want to look at that image and go, I'm aspiring to be that. But I think, I just think there's so much value in the you versus you mentality. We have I just sold my gym, as I mentioned to you, Harold, but we had a very small, we still do, it's under a new owner. We have a very small community gym, as you're mentioning it, like the old the old pumping iron gym. It's very much that community focus, people having fun, people training together. It's a very like small, tight knit community. But because of that, because of who I am and me being the owner, I attract a certain type of people to that gym. And we don't attract the genetic elite or the huge dudes wanting to do bodybuilding or the huge powerlifters or whatever. We attract generally people relatively similar to me, like your average person wanting to improve themselves. And so, as you're saying, if you're benching 100 kilos in my gym, you're a very strong human being. You know what I mean? So it is kind of a case of like, I just having realistic expectations, but then maybe even controlling, or what should I say, designing your environment both online and in person based on like, what gym you go to and then who you're following online. Design that environment a little bit better to maybe set yourself up for, a mental space where you aren't constantly comparing to these people that are so far from you as where you are right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think because it kind of goes back to obviously the benefit of comparison to an extent is obviously upward and downward social comparison. Upward, in which you'll kind of compare yourself to somebody you deem to be better than you or perceived to be better, which is obviously going to make you feel pretty bad. Or downward, which sounds pretty bad, but you compare yourself to somebody you perceive to be less than you, smaller than you, weaker than you, which is going to make you feel maybe a bit better. But I think when you go to an individual, like a community gym like you're kind of speaking about, and it's not about who's the biggest, who's the strongest, because I'm sure a lot of your members probably go to that gym because it's part of their social life. Like they probably, instead of going out on the piss every day, which again, if you want to do that, I respect it, you do you, but they'll probably go there because, I'm going to go to the gym because I guarantee if I walk in that gym, I'm going to see somebody I know and I'm going to chat with them and have a great time. Yeah. And you end up just going, and you probably know everyone by name. And they probably know you by name, and everyone else knows everyone. They probably do community things together. It's all a lot of like almost encouragement. No one's caring about who's bigger than who's stronger than who. So ultimately, you argue in that gym, there's probably minimal comparison occurring, or maybe if it is, it's very subconscious. But people are probably a lot happier than they might be if they go to a commercial gym.
Yeah.
So I think things like that are just fantastic. I love I've always liked the idea of like independent gyms and community-driven gyms, because essentially, it, like you said, you attract the people you want to attract, and it always comes from the owner, or just the community vibe. And I think if someone doesn't align with that community, they're going to quickly get worked out. But it kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier. The sad reality is, and this is becoming more and more apparent, and we actually did a podcast on this recently, is that because when you and I probably grew up, social media wasn't a huge thing. Do you know what I mean? I kind of didn't really get into Instagram properly until I was 22, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Kids these days get into Instagram at 13 years old, 14 years old. And I think when you're immediately compared to the best of the best, or exposed to the best of the best so early, without really developing that kind of psychological maturity to take a step back and be like, actually, that's not realistic, or actually, you know what, they look fantastic, but they are that 1%. And you're not able to potentially say, you know what, they look fantastic, but I look fantastic too, but I just look a different fantastic.
Yeah.
When you aren't able to kind of identify that, you get thrown down a rabbit hole of when, especially I think probably more prominent in guys, at 16, 17 years old, they turn around saying, I want to be a competitive bodybuilder. You say, fantastic, if that's what you want to achieve, go for it. I'm going to take drugs. It's like, you're 17. Why,
Yeah.
At this age, I'm not going to name anyone because I don't want to disrespect, but I had a 17-year-old come up to me literally the other day. We messaged me a few weeks ago, who goes to my gym, said, Harry, can I ask your opinion on something? I said, yeah, of course, what's going on? I'd never spoken to him before, but he obviously knew who I was through the podcast. And he says, I'm thinking about going on anabolics. I said, how old are you? He said, I'm 17 years old. And I said, I mean, no disrespect by this, but I said, for the majority of people, at 17 years old, if you want to go on anabolics, it's not because you're hardworking, it's not because you're dedicated, not because you think you're going to be the best, it's because you're lazy and you're impatient. And but it's the reality that at that age, I
100%.
think I've always been a believer of running anabolics. You do you. It's completely like the natural stage thing is something I will never discuss online, because it's not. I actively hide my physique from my YouTube channel because I don't want people to look at me and be like, I'm going to sub to you because you look a certain way. That's the last thing I ever want. I also don't want people ever looking and say, you know what, I'm not going to sub to you because you look a certain way. I've actually had messages saying, because obviously I show a bit more on my Instagram, quite a few messages saying, if I knew what you looked like, I wouldn't watch your content. And I'm like, that's fine. So I'd rather not show what I look like.
Yeah.
And therefore, whether I'm natural or not is completely irrelevant, because my physique is irrelevant. But when he comes up to me and says, I'm going to do it, I think when you go down that route, hard work and dedication always has to go up a level because your ceiling is raised. But at 17 years old, it makes me feel sad, because it's largely coming from the fact that he's been looking at these bodybuilders online from such a young age, and he's not been exposed to anything else. And I kind of presented the idea of, not to sound rude, but I said, you haven't earned this yet. If you want to go down that route, you have to earn it. Like, you have to develop a natural base before you even consider going down that route. Because I said, obviously, he's like, I want to be a competitive bodybuilder. I said, name me a top level junior bodybuilder. He's like, I can't name you any. I said, name me a top level like open. He goes, Ronnie Coleman, all this. I said, just because not many people outside you will care about the juniors. You care about the big boys.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the big boys are big because they probably built a good base first before going down that route. Then I kind of said to him, I was like, 17 years old, you feel like you're mature enough to make a decision that could potentially take years off your life. How's it going to impact your friends? How's it going to impact your family? I said, it could potentially render you infertile. So one day you're going to get a girlfriend, and you're going to fall in love with her. She's going to love you more than anyone in the world. And you're going to marry her. You want to be with her forever. And then you're going to get presented with the idea of she wants to start a family with you. And you have to turn around and look her in the eye and say, at the age of 17, I made a decision, which means that I can't naturally have kids with you anymore. I'm infertile. So how's it going to impact your relationship? I said, at 17 years old, you're willing to make that decision. And he essentially turned around and said to me, he goes, I really appreciate your input. That's really opened my eyes a lot. But I'm going to do it anyway. I was like, okay.
Oh my God.
I was like, you know what? I said, look, if you're adamant, I think you're an idiot. No disrespect, I think you're an idiot. But if you are going to do it anyway, talk to people. Just talk to people that you trust. At least if you do it in the safest possible way, regardless of whether I think it's right or not, stay off the bodybuilding forums. But that's all he knows from this comparison of social media.
Yeah.
he's only seen these physiques that are the 1%. He's only seen these forums that tell you this and this. It's like, well, he doesn't know how to identify what's good information, what's bad information. And he tells me what drugs he's going to run and how much. I said, I that's a lot. That's a lot. Like, even when he speaks about going on testosterone, I said, well, Josh Bridgman, who's an IFBB pro, takes less testosterone than that, and he's an IFBB pro. I said, you want to take more than him at 17 years old? It blows my mind. But I feel almost maybe I'm desensitized to it because I was older when I got into that industry, so I developed a bit of psychological maturity. It's just scary. It genuinely scares me, and I found it quite upsetting because it's like, what a hard world these kids are growing up in and these teenagers growing up in, where I'd spend my life watching Disney Channel at 16 years old, and I was loving life. My comparison was with bloody Zoe 101 and Lizzie McGuire. I was the best time Hannah Montana. I used to love it. And then now their comparison is TikTok, is YouTube, is Instagram. And it's made me kind of feel for them in the sense that I feel like almost this could probably contribute to a lot of mental health problems that are happening in the younger individuals. Is that they are just thrown into this deep end where before they're fully matured, they're just being exposed to so many things that maybe they shouldn't be exposed to, or maybe they need to learn more about. When 100%. I never had those stresses. And I'm sure you probably didn't have as many of those stresses either.
Well, I mean, if I think about me as a 17-year-old and then me as a now almost 33-year-old, the difference in how much I've evolved in that time is just, it's a 180. Like, I'm a completely different person. So if I had made some huge decision at 17 around, going on to anabolics, I mean, it's such an immature time to make such a large decision. I mean, and I have no, look, if people are taking performance enhancing drugs, I'm like, cool, that's totally fine. Like, do your thing. Like, I'm totally happy with that. But at the same time, I think, as you alluded to, it's about education. Like, there is guys out there now who are very smart and methodical and are trying to help people do this in the safest way possible, instead of like the 17-year-old taking way more gear than is appropriate for where he's at currently. And even guys like, I mean, I don't follow like Josh Bridgman and those guys anymore, but when I used to, check out what they were doing, they built a solid natural base for years and years and competed naturally and also had, decent genetics and built great physiques, and then decided, hey, look, now it's time for me to take that next step. But even then, when they're taking that next step into taking anabolics, it's still done in a structured and methodical way that's at least researched, and you're doing the least possible to make consistent gains and put you in that in that sort of ballpark.
Absolutely. I think it kind of goes on what you said there. It's doing the least possible. It's again they're getting the most out of the least. I think a lot impatience tells you that's a bad idea. A lot of young guys don't have that patience, and it's like you said with Josh. He competed many seasons as a natural. He was open about when he went on gear. He gets his blood done. He does all the things. And when I said this to that guy, he goes, "Well, I couldn't go over how cheap it is." I said, "Well, yeah, testosterone is extremely cheap." But I said, "Have you factored in the other things you need to consider?" He goes, "Oh, what do you mean?" I said, you can get your blood done. He goes, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, immediately it's a red flag." I said, "You have to check your levels. You'll go on with this idea. You don't know where you are. You could have some underlying conditions. Your cholesterol might be an absolute mockery already, and that's going to make it worse." So you have to understand, it's like, how is your body internally? He goes, "Oh, how do I do that?" I was like, "Oh, no, okay, this is not going well." And then I was like, "What about like health support supplements, things like that probably are quite important." Obviously, the bodybuilding forums don't tell you any of this, and it's just such a sad reality. That's why I always kind of said is like, I kind of presented him the idea is a lot of like natural guys online who claim natural. A lot of them, unfortunately, especially since the big blow up of the fake natty era, when kind of around the Chris Jones era, when that side of YouTube, that's when the fake natty era really came around. A lot of guys sadly lie about it, and I was always kind of a big believer. It's like, no, I've nothing against anyone who would ever take anything, but either don't say anything about it at all, and like just don't say you're natural if you're not. Just say you don't talk about it, or just ignore it entirely, or be honest. Because a lot of times people don't want to be honest about it and say, like, by the way, I'm taking drugs, because sadly there is an element of judgment. People will turn around and say, "Oh, I don't like you anymore because you're doing this." Or in some countries, it's a legality issue as well, or a sponsor issue. Some sponsors won't work with you if you admit to certain things, and that's when money comes into it as well. Something you'll prevent yourself from making a living. But if you just say don't want to talk about it, or it's irrelevant, or yes, I am, then I think it opens up the conversation a little more, which I think almost arguably can be a hindrance. It's that so like 10 years ago when Matt Ogus was really on the scene, because I learned so much from Matt Ogus. He's the one who introduced me to flexible dieting, and I never knew that concept before. And when he did, mine was blown, because I thought my life was chicken, broccoli, and rice 6 times a day. Then he told me I could eat food I enjoy. I said, he must be lying. I said, he's lying. Surely not. Why would he? Why would he say that to me? Then I realised you could. I was like, well, honestly, baffled me. And then back then, because drugs are so taboo, no one really spoke about it. And it's fantastic that more and more people speak about it now. Love to see it. But now, because it's almost so spoken about, which is great, it's desensitized a lot of people to it. So when you make a joke about, see all these kids making jokes about taking tren and everything, you're like, do you know how harmful things like tren are? That's not nice. That's some sketchy stuff. That's proven to be neurotoxic, so it does negatively impact brain chemistry. And it's like, but everyone takes it. Oh, it's fun. It's like, it's your brain. It's a very important part of your body. You need to like think about that. And it's almost desensitized people to it. So when you talk about anabolics, everyone's like, oh, that's normal now. It's like, great. That's great. That's in conversation, but don't neglect its importance, and don't neglect the severity of the decision you're kind of making. But when you are exposed to the 1%, it's like, well, it sounds bad, but at some extent, I feel like, you know what, if I was 17 in his shoes, maybe I would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, 100%. Maybe I would have fallen victim to the same trap, because I fell victim to plenty of fitness traps anyway in the industry. Maybe that would have just been another one of the traps I fell victim to. I just don't know, because I'm removed from it.
Well, it's almost like, when I got into training at, 19, 20, whatever, and I had zero idea about anything, and the thought of buying some protein powder was like, oh my God, it's all going to go, I'm going to blow up now because I'm doing the big stuff. I'm going to buy some protein powder. And it's almost like, well, if anabolics was as talked about as it is now, and as kind of, as you said, maybe like, almost like desensitized, maybe at that point I would have even gone that step further, because I just had, no knowledge. But maybe if it was normalized, it's like normalized to a point where you're forgetting about the importance, or like you said, the severity of this decision as well. It's just such a tricky one, man, because it's like, I guess it's very hard to take a 30-year-old mature brain and try to impart that into a 17-year-old immature brain, and go, there is actually a life past 21. Like, you have to think about what's going to happen, and especially for me, like the thought of, like, again, whoever people want to take anabolics, that's fine, that's fantastic, whatever they want to do with their lives, and they can do it in a decently safe way, and they can get great results. And if they want to obviously compete at the top level and in various sports, I mean, even, I don't know if you watched any of the recent CrossFit games and things like that. A lot of the talk recently about, CrossFit competitors at the highest level taking anabolics, because of the reality is, a lot of these sports, to be at the top tier, you do have to be enhancing yourself, and that's just the reality of professional sports and in the modern era. But I lost my train of thought. Oh yes, but if you want to do that, fantastic. But at the same time, for me, I'm not a competitive athlete. I'm just doing training because it enhances my life. It makes me feel good. I like the way I look, all of that stuff. But I also have a very long-term mindset, in the sense that I have a life after 45. Like, when my body stops progressing in terms of building muscle, building strength, there will be a point where there's diminishing returns. And I still have a very long life after that point, if I've done things well and I have, longevity on my side. If I have a very short mindset of going, or I just want to build the most amount of muscle right now so that I can look great at festivals and on the beach and whatever, then taking steroids is going to be the best approach. But the reality is, at some point in your life, that is all not going to matter. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have a long life where your physique is irrelevant, but you just want to ensure that you're healthy enough to be able to enjoy your days on this earth with your family, with your friends, all of that good stuff. So it's kind of trying to put in this long-term mindset into a kid who doesn't give a shit. They just care about, am I going to get jacked enough to because you're in the UK, go to Ibiza this summer and get my shirt off and and that kind of thing. So it's a tricky one, man. And I don't really know the approach there, but I guess you did what you could in that situation and trying to impart some wisdom.
Well, I think you always got to try what you can. I think ultimately, like, it's what you said about to be at a high level with anything, you probably do need to go down that route. But I could take every drug in the world, every drug under the sun. I'll still never be a top level CrossFit Games competitor. I will never win because, and I hold my hands up. I will never beat Usain Bolt in a race. Like I just physically, I could not. Genetically, the hard work he puts in, like so many things he does, I just don't. I'm not capable of doing. So I think it's obviously drugs tell one part of the story, but to kids, when it's not about, I want to get as close to Usain Bolt as possible, I want to get as close to Rich Froning as possible, something along those lines. It's more like you said about, I want to get topless on Ibiza. It's like, well, you get topless on Ibiza anyway. You don't need anabolics in that way. You probably look for, like, I think regardless of how you look, if you want to take your top off, you know, take the bloody top off. It goes back to what you said about the you versus you mentality. The only person who really cares about how you look is no one else around you. It's literally you. How many times have you been at a beach and you've just started assessing different physiques? Probably not that often.
Yeah.
So you're probably there like, hopefully I look okay myself.
That's right.
I think you're probably more focused on you than anyone else.
100%.
So it is tricky.
Yeah. It's interesting. I guess almost bringing it back to social media, and as you just mentioned, if no matter what you did, you wouldn't be able to be Usain Bolt, or you wouldn't be able to be Rich Froning, and it's the same for a lot of people. But if we bring it back to social media, like say you look at one of these really famous Instagram girls who is posting a booty workout on Instagram, right? And they have this incredible glute development. And oftentimes I feel like a decent amount of that is genetic based. Of course, you can work really hard and progress a lot in your physique. But I think some of these huge names, a lot of it, whether you could do the exact same work as them, eat exactly the same as them, sleep the same as them, all that good stuff, and you still won't get the same results as them because there are genetic differences there. And then you get into the other side of a lot of these Instagram workouts and seeing what they are doing, and then also knowing, because we've got a little bit more of a critical eye for like what's good programming, knowing that, okay, well, what they're doing in that post right there is not actually what's gotten them the results they already have.
Yeah.
They're just posting this because it's fancy and it's going to get some likes. And one of the original videos I watched of yours, Howard, was around Instagram booty workouts. I'd love you to actually touch on that and almost touch on like how much of the stuff that we see online in regards to like, because growing glutes is a big thing at the moment, is actually effective training. Like a lot of these crazy exercises you start seeing. I don't really see a lot of it because I don't follow it, but I know you do. You've probably seen some wild stuff out there.
Yeah, I think fortunately during the YouTube journey, I kind of got to a point where I was really stuck. I didn't know what to post. I just didn't follow it anymore. But then I started noticing one thing. I started talking about it, and then people started sending it to me and telling me what to start following. So it's almost like 99% of my content is not my own ideas. It's what people have sent to me and have asked me to look at. It's fantastic, which I really appreciate. But as you said, it's kind of exposed me to a lot of things. It's almost I wish I didn't see, but I would have never have seen otherwise. And I think what you said there has a lot of truth, is genetics do play a massive role, and probably a much bigger role than people think. I'm not ever discrediting anyone's hard work. I'm sure a lot of these athletes and these Instagram girls, or whatever it may be, train hard.
100%.
But the sad reality is it goes back to what I said at the beginning about maybe they're not telling the truth. And what I mean by that is they can say they do these workouts, but do you actually know they did those workouts? Or did they actually train maybe more effectively, but they know that, sadly, effective training is largely quite boring. It's very repetitive. Like I've done the same workouts for months now. And imagine I post that every week. By the way, still doing the same dumbbell press. Nothing's changed. I've done an extra rep this week. You probably don't care. I care because I was like, wow, I've made progress. I love that. But you really don't care. But if I say, well, I did this dumbbell press on a Bosu ball, and suddenly like, oh, that's interesting. That's new. Does it work more? And I think that's where it always comes down to, is we said about those fancy movements, it's more Instagrammable. And when social media is your job and what you're posting actually really does matter, in the sense that it gets you money, it gets you engagement, which is relevant to you, you can't blame them for posting it. But what you can blame them for is lying about it by saying, I got these glutes doing 10 minutes of this every day. It's like, just be honest. Just say, you know what, I built my glutes doing these movements, but if you want to, you can do these movements. Granted, they're not as effective, but you know what, maybe they're more fun. And I think arguably, if you enjoy a movement, despite whether I say it's nonsense or not, if you genuinely enjoy it, then I say, you know what, go for it. But then you also have to acknowledge that, say, this is not going to be as effective as this. I probably won't get to my goals as quickly as if I did this, but you know, I just want a bit of fun today. Then you know, go for it. But I think a lot of the movements you see online, it almost if there's more moving parts, then it's probably problematic. It says that if you're just doing a squat, fantastic, love a squat, great movement. But if you're doing, I've seen this so many times, especially on TikTok, it's horrendous. If you're doing a squat on 2 different Bosu balls, and immediately I'm like, that's a lot of moving parts have occurred here.
Yeah.
What then you argue is like, how is that more effective? It's like, what about that makes it more effective? It's like, oh, it's stability. It's like, well, to build muscle, you want to be as stable as possible. You're not trying to take stability away. So you now almost argued the point there. But it looks really good and it looks really cool. And it looks very Instagrammable. It's probably going to get loads of likes. But it is a bit of a shame is that when people do lie about how they achieve their results and then do almost sell their soul to the devil in the sense where they will lie to push these silly programs and these silly movements that sell a dream but haven't disclosed that, you know, genetically had a really good shape anyway. And I resistance trained for 3 years before going into these workouts. And also in some cases, maybe I've had enhancements. Maybe I've had a Brazilian butt lift or something, which is a big one that does float around the industry where people send to me saying, do you think this person's had surgery? Wow. So, well, who am I to say they have or haven't? You can there are suspicions of like lack of contractile tissue. You would be like, well, that might suggest otherwise. But again, who am I? It's just innocent until proven guilty. But the lack of almost honesty about things, no wonder so many people feel bad about their results and feel bad about who they are and their progress. Because it's exactly the same as when I was getting into the industry where I believed Flex Magazine, if I wanted to put an inch on my arms in 3 weeks, I had to train them 3 times a week. Then I did that, and I was like, no, my arms haven't grown. It's crazy. What's changed? Then you realise that, and then it almost makes you believe that you're the problem. Because the magazine guaranteed me I'll put an inch on my arms. And I did exactly as they said. I followed the workout to the T. I did everything. And my arms did not grow a millimetre. And I was like, I'm at fault. Like, I've got bad genetics. I'm lazy. I'm not dedicated enough. I could have done more. And I feel really bad about myself. Then a lot of these women who follow these workouts come away from it and they say, I get so many messages where people say, I follow this person's workouts where they were doing this. I look at the workouts and I'm like, ooh. And my results just aren't showing. And I feel like maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe my genetics are really bad. How do I know if I've got good genetics? And you turn around and say, I don't think your genetics are the problem. I think, to be honest, I think it's just a really ineffective workout. I feel like you'd probably be better suited maybe doing X, Y, and Z instead of ABC. And then maybe do that for a few months and understand that these results aren't going to come in weeks. They're going to come in months and years. And then come back to me and say, you know what, actually, that was better. But again, that boring doesn't sell, and that's very sad, but it's true. But so it's hard. So I think I do understand it, but I just wish there was just a bit more transparency.
Yeah. There's 2 things I want to mention. One is that you actually brought up a really cool comparison between, like, I was very much like you when I started training. I read all the Flex magazines, the muscle and fitness magazines. I remember being on deployment in Egypt with the army, and I'd go to our camp. We had a library on our camp, and they'd have all these like Flex magazines, and I would go down there on my days off, and I'd just like pour over this content. Because then I didn't have access to like all the evidence-based content I have now. It's just like, well, what's in this magazine is great, and this is true, and this is how you train. But it's the similarity between you doing that workout for 6 weeks, and I remember doing a very similar one of like, this will put an inch on your arms or whatever in 6 weeks, and you do this high volume arm workout, and you see this in this magazine. The comparison of that and then like this fancy new glute workout on TikTok is almost like the same, because it's just 2 marketing companies going, what's flash and new, and that's going to tap into the consumer's desire for instant gratification. Like, get an inch on your arms in 6 weeks. Awesome. Every dude is gonna be like, let's do this program. And then you get the same thing with the booty girl workout on TikTok saying like, do these exercises and you'll get glutes like mine. It's a very similar tactic. I just wanted to bring that up. And then secondly, what do you think it is about, and we can kind of finish on this. What do you think it is about, you mentioned that, generally the best effective workouts are those boring kind of workouts that are kind of the same, and you do them for long periods of time. And I was actually having this discussion with a client this morning. He's been working with me for probably a year and a half now, just purely on muscle gain. And we've just been doing cycles and cycles and cycles of muscle gain, muscle gain, muscle gain. And at the end of the day, it can be quite boring training, but you just have to be so consistent with it over months and years. And I was saying, look, it is hard work. It is eating a lot of food. It is being consistent with your training, but it's also just doing all those three things for a very, very long period of time. So what do you think it is, Harold, that is, I guess, the benefit of doing these more boring workouts that aren't these like flashy glute exercises on a Bosu ball or with a band around your head or whatever?
I think ultimately it comes down to the fact, let's say like your primary goal is like hypertrophy, so the development of muscle. I think one of the big things people overlook is just movement efficiency. And essentially you want to progressively overload, you want to get better at, like, you want to lift more. And one way of lifting more is actually to get better at the movement by doing the movement more and obviously doing the movement well. And if I can dumbbell press consistently every week, let's say twice a week or once a week, every week for months, I guarantee I'm going to progressively overload that dumbbell press because I'm going to get better with the movement pattern. I'm going to get stronger in that movement. And if I'm stronger than progressively overloading, then I'm probably going to develop some muscle. But it's almost tedious knowing that going into the gym every Monday, I'm going to do the same exercises. I'm going to do the same or similar number of sets. Volume may change throughout the cycle, but all I'm trying to achieve from that workout is that I'd be so happy if I got one extra rep. I'd be so happy if I did two kilos extra on the dumbbells, just something like that. And it is dull, it is tedious, but the key thing, if your goal requires that, to some extent you have to tolerate it. You can change your workout every week and do these fancy workouts, but if biomechanically they're not very effective for your goals, it's immediately a hindrance. And also, if you can't get better at what you're doing, how do you know if you're progressively overloading? How do you know if you're getting better? Well, you don't, because I've done a different movement every week for the last 3 months. Immediately, it's like, well, I don't know if my dumbbell press has got better. I don't know if my squat has got better because I haven't squatted again for 3 months. It's just chippy away at it over and over again. But as you kind of said, it is tedious, but it needs must. I don't think it needs to be that way. If ultimately your goal is to optimize building muscle, then you probably want to do some boring stuff for a very long time and just to hammer it, just get really good at it, be really specific. I guess goes into the kind of art of specificity. But if you turn around and say, I want to get a bit more muscle, but ultimately I just really want to have fun with my training, and then my pure goal is just enjoyment, then I say, do whatever you want to do. To me, I find doing the same workouts every week quite fun. And you're probably the same. It's tedious, but it's also fun because not only because the movements are just part of it. I just love being in the gym. I love being in the environment. I love seeing my friends. I love just knowing that it sounds really stupid, but I love knowing that the gym and this kind of element of fitness is one of the few aspects of my life that I have direct control over. Nobody else can change my goals. No one else can change my progress. I'm the only person that can control what I do and what I achieve. You can't stop me from achieving anything. My family can't do anything. It's none of that. Is that if I go to the gym, I work hard, I eat well, I eat what I need to do, and I tick all those boxes, I will make progress. If I'm not making progress, I can change that by doing something better or different. Whereas, like, you go into the work environment, I could work so hard at a 9 to 5. I could work more than anyone else. I'm not guaranteed a promotion. I'm not guaranteed recognition. I can't shoot. I can try and have an input, but I can't directly control progress. Whereas in the gym, you just can. And I think just being able to go into the gym, despite knowing that I'm going to do the same thing over and over again, knowing that I'm doing this because in doing so, I'm going to make more progress, or hopefully make more progress, gives me that element of control that I really like. And ultimately, if you have a goal of I want to get from A to B, and that B is really important to me, like getting there as effectively, as efficiently, as optimally as possible is such an importance to me. If if you have a B, but you'll get there at your own pace, or you don't, I want to get there, but I just want to have the most fun doing it, then all the power to you. You go down that route. But for me personally, it's probably very similar for you, is you want to get to your B and you want to get there in the best possible means for you, which is probably quite a boring means at that.
Yeah, I love it, man. It's probably a really good place to finish. I think it was a really good take home for the listeners right there. But I did want to say, give you the floor just to say, hey, like, what are you working on? Do you want to plug your stuff? Let the listeners know what the YouTube is and what that's all about.
God, what's going on? 2022 is a bit of a late start to the year for me.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm finally kind of making the decision to push TFNL a bit further. Obviously, TFNL being ForNever Lean, the YouTube channel, and also obviously the Instagram and stuff. But YouTube's like the dominant.
Actually, platform. Yeah. What's the backstory with the name there, man?
So initially, so it all came back in. This all kind of stems from like journey in the industry. Is that I started it with two of my friends years ago, back in 2016, and ultimately it kind of largely stemmed from the idea of in 2016 there was not a lot of body acceptance. I don't know if you were kind of, because obviously you were into the Chris Jones and Matt Ogus. It was all summer shredding with Guzman.
Yeah.
Everything was about being lean. Yeah. And I kind of got there because I was kind of getting into powerlifting at this point. I was like, you know what? I don't want to be lean all the time. I don't want to be shredded year round because I don't think it's sustainable. And to us, I don't think that would make me very happy. So we kind of made like a bit of a running joke about it, saying, you know, everyone's always trying to be lean. We're going to be ForNever Lean because we're powerlifting, and powerlifters typically have higher body fat in lots of cases. And we're like, you know, I don't want to conform to the industry standards of having to look a certain way to be happy. And then it kind of like further developed is that we started developing a bit more like body acceptance in ourselves, and also identifying that, you know what, I think you could be happy just looking how you want to look and not having to look how the influencers tell you to look how the media tells you to look, and look how just the world is telling you to look. And that's ultimately where it came from, is ForNever Lean just basically stemmed from the body acceptance of just looking how you want to look for you rather than pursuing the desires of other people and those around you.
So good, man.
Which, that's good. But it's but I'm finally starting to push it a bit further, and I'm hopefully looking to start coaching, like online coaching, because I've been a PT it was one of my jobs for nearly 10 years now.
Wow.
So I finally branched into the realm of online coaching. TFNL clothing and merchandise, so that the clothing side of things is coming out hopefully in November, provided that the suppliers go well and they play ball. It's a bit fruity at the moment.
Okay.
And also hopefully in December, I'm looking to release like the TFNL growth guide, which is because I'll do a bit of like a series on YouTube. Is every month or so I'll do like a deep dive approach on how best to target certain muscles, or an effective means of targeting certain muscles. I just did the hamstrings today, actually, so Monday.
Awesome.
And at the end of it, when it's all finished, I want to put it down to a PDF, which is going to be hopefully very educational, and also give you a workout structure. If you want to follow it, you can. So more hypertrophy driven, but also explain why it's done a certain way, so you can take that template and make your own if you want to. So I want people to be able to take a lot from it, hopefully.
Awesome.
But
yeah, that sounds great.
The goal is to get that around by Christmas, but it may take longer depending on. Well, I've already started putting it together, and we'll be in September, so we'll see how long it takes me.
Yeah. If you're anything like me, these like little projects, they end up kind of spiraling out of control, and you know, spend heaps of time on them and making them way more in depth than you originally thought. So good luck with that one, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. And final question for you is, or final segment is, just a guest recommendation. So is there anything you're been digging right now that you want to recommend to our listeners, whether it's like, it could be anything from an artist that you're loving, or a podcast you're into, or a book you're reading, or a show you're watching? What's a current thing you're into that you want to recommend?
Oh God, I don't know, but I don't know. Do we keep it fitness related, or can I talk about how much I love Stranger Things? I've watched that 5 times.
100%, man. Anything you like.
Honestly, I'll give a book recommendation, which again I think has some like questionable approaches in it. Like some of the information is like, with anything, someone's always going to argue something, but it's quite mental health related. It's a book by Johan Hari called Lost Connections, and again, mental health is quite a big thing for me and my channel. And when I was going through like a big spell of suicidal thoughts and depression, and was heavily medicated and was dealing with addiction at the time, that book, I think, wouldn't say it directly helped me, but it opened my eyes to a lot of the issues within the kind of pharmaceutical industry, especially when it looks at the realm of like psychoactive drugs. And that book alone gave me that last nudge I needed to decide not to pursue, I guess, medical intervention anymore, like take any more medication for my mental health, which for me, which I know medication can help a lot of people, but for me personally, coming off the medication was one of the biggest things for me and drastically improved my life, because being on them had such a negative impact on my life, obviously, like I said, about the development of addiction. And I always recommend people it's quite a short book. It's not a long one at all, but just give it, especially the first half where he speaks about just the realities of just like serotonin levels in the brain and stuff. I always recommend it's a really good book to just read, not with the idea of you're going to change your life, because I'm not a really big believer in this book changed my life or this is this, but just to give you a slightly different perspective and make you maybe encourage a bit of critical thinking yourself. So Lost Connections is a big one.
Yeah, Lost Connections is, I haven't read it yet, but I've watched a bunch of Johan's stuff on YouTube and a couple of his podcasts, and I think it's real groundbreaking work. And he's done all the research into depression and what leads us there and how to to move away from it, and the pharmaceutical side, really cool stuff, man. So that's a great recommendation.
Well, hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah, and then your second recommendation is watching Stranger Things.
I love it, honestly. I'm such a loser when it comes to stuff like that, but I actually love it. I've seen it through about 6 times.
Wow, that's epic! Oh, we finished the last season a month or so ago, and it was a pretty big epic season.
Now I'm a bit I guess frustrated. I've got to wait 2 years for the next one.
I know, yeah, that's the problem.
Really
you gotta dive into like another series to keep you going.
Never know what to watch. Never know. I'm useless with it. I either don't watch anything at all, or I'll binge something obsessively and then never not watch anything for months.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Well, you just have to start Stranger Things again, and you'll probably get through it another 3 times before the next season comes out.
If it makes you feel better, I'm halfway through the last season again.
Okay. Do you have a favorite season, seeing as you've watched them so many times?
Probably 3. I don't want to give any spoilers away, because I'm hoping people have watched it, but the ending with like the Billy and everything, it sounds really stupid, but I saw this fan made tribute, and it's one of the most emotional things I've ever seen in my life. I nearly cried, and I watched it. Ever since watching that, it's kind of almost like give me a new appreciation for that season, because it's almost like his character development of how he starts off as an asshole and then becomes like something like, you have a good heart. And I know it's obviously it's made up, it's TV, but you almost connect and almost like attached to the characters to some extent.
100%.
What about you? What's your favorite season?
Well, I mean, I was just going to say that is the essence of a really good show, whether it's a movie or a series, is character development, because that's really what you're watching it for. We know it's all fake, but at the end of the day, you have some kind of like connection to these characters because of their development throughout a series or a movie, and I can tell it as something's going to be a good show pretty quickly based on the acting and how you can see that character starts to develop over the time. So yeah, man, I think that's a worthy take home. I think I watched season 1 again last year, just to I was going to start working my way through again, but whenever I try to watch a series, I run out of time. But season 1 was really, really good. I think it was just phenomenal. Yeah. And then I do think season 3 is awesome as well, because I think they just leveled up the music and the costume design in season 3 to like a whole nother level, because it really hit that kind of late 80s theme so perfectly. And I think it's just nostalgic watching stuff like that for some reason. I guess just because of my age, like being a late 80s, early 90s kid, it is quite nostalgic to watch stuff like that. So yeah, man, I think it really hits home for our generation, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it almost makes me a bit sad that I wasn't raised in the 80s, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. Well, at least you wouldn't have to deal with social media, man, so you'd be way better off.
Well, yeah, I guess better off to some extent, but luckily, I think probably same as you, I find social media can be a curse, but can also be a blessing. In the sense that removing geographical limitations, like if it weren't for social media, I would have never met you.
100%.
If it weren't for social media, neither of us would have platforms where we can hopefully help the people that choose to invest into us But then flip around, if it weren't for social media, I probably would have a lot less insecurities to deal with. But maybe I would have attached them elsewhere. Who knows? So it's almost like great power comes great responsibility sort of thing, a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, there's huge pros and cons to it, and I always go back and forth between those. And I guess that's why we have to have discussions like this where we discuss the cons and then give people certain strategies to enhance their social media lives so that they can get the pros from it, which is the connection and the community and the education, but less of the cons of the the insecurities, the comparisons, those type of things that come along with it. So yeah, man, I really want to thank you for coming in and discussing this with us and providing so much good insight, but also just giving me someone to have a yarn with and talk about this stuff, which I really enjoy. So I think I could keep rambling with you for ages, man, but I think we'll cut this one off here and we'll let you go. You're probably ready for bed at this point.
Oh, trust me, I'll be up for hours. But honestly, I just want to say I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be on here. I appreciate the conversation. It's always nice kind of interacting with like-minded individuals who have a very similar outlook and just life in general, not just fitness.
Yeah, man.
And similar boat to you, I could talk for hours. So if you ever want to do episode 2 together, I'm always keen.
100%, man. We'll settle up. Man, I really enjoyed that conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to that one as well. I know we kind of jumped around topics a little bit and dived into a few things that I didn't really have on the cards, but that's, I guess, the beauty of a conversation that is a little more free-flowing, and when you get two sort of like-minded individuals together, it ends up being a really fun conversation and hopefully insightful for you guys as well. We actually continued chatting for like another hour after this, and honestly, I could have recorded that one for part 2, but we might just have to save that one and bring Harry on for another round in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, guys, so definitely flick me a DM. I'm always open for a chat, and we can sort of discuss what your key takeaways were from this episode. Hopefully some insight for you. So hopefully it provides some perspectives on social media world and perhaps providing some strategies to better use this platform while also honoring our mental health. If you haven't yet, check out Harry's channel, ForNever Lean, on YouTube. Do yourself a favor, check it out. Some great content there, really down to earth, but also providing some really evidence-based sort of information and kind of debunking some of the myths that are out there on these social media platforms. So to wrap up, as always, if you enjoyed the show, share it with a friend and shoot through a quick review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That's it from me. Catch ya in the next one, plant friends.